What's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a little bit about the Chicago Bulls. I've only made one video about them this entire season, and that was back when the report first dropped that LaVine could be traded in November, and outside of that, it's been largely an uneventful year for the franchise. However, there was one date I have been keeping my eye on for Chicago this entire season, and that was the trade deadline, because looking at this roster and a lot of the rumors circulating, they felt like one of the teams that could be one of the biggest players in what otherwise felt like was going to be a pretty uneventful trade deadline, at least compared to years past. They had a bunch of guys that could potentially be moved from star-level players to decent role players, and they're a franchise that doesn't have a lot of direction at the moment. There were months of Zach LaVine trade talks. Could he be dealt leading up to the deadline? Didn't seem like he had a lot of interest, but at the very least, felt like a possibility. They had DeRozan on an expiring contract that a team could go ahead and take a flyer on. Felt like he made a lot of sense to be dealt. Vucevic, still on the roster. Andre Drummond is having one of the best seasons of his recent career, so maybe a team goes ahead and adds him to just bring in some rebounding veteran presence. Torrey Craig, solid role player. They could trade away Javon Carter. Alex Caruso is maybe one of the single most valuable players on the entire trade market when you take a look at his contract and the value he brings as a great defender that's in the midst of his best offensive season yet. Some of the buzz around them did die down leading into the final few days leading up to the deadline, like LaVine getting hurt, which ultimately pretty much got rid of any chances of him getting traded, but I feel like they would still get some type of deal done and at least steal off a couple other pieces. Instead, they did literally nothing. They didn't dump off Andre Drummond. They didn't trade any of their role players. They kept all their stars. They didn't even do like a pick swap or something like that. Nothing for cash considerations. Not a single trade. And with the Bulls standing completely pat, this is now the third trade deadline in a row where they've done absolutely nothing. Nothing in 2022, nothing in 2023, where last year was like one of the most eventful deadlines ever, and nothing in 2024. Not a single move. And the last time they made a trade involving a player is 2021. It's been 3 years, and the last time I believe they made an in-season trade involving a player was at the deadline in 2021 for Vucevic, which feels like genuinely forever ago. They're just doing nothing. They continue to stand pat at trade deadlines in the offseason. They just keep maintaining the status quo for a team whose status quo has been mediocrity for the past few years. As I record this, the Bulls are currently in the 9th seed in the Eastern Conference with a record of 25-27, 2 games below 500. They're technically not that far out of the playoffs. They're just 3.5 games behind the 6-seeded Pacers and 3 games back of the 7 and 8-seeded Miami Heat and Orlando Magic. But in my opinion, those teams are all firmly better than them, so they're probably going to end up in the play-in tournament for the second straight year. And this isn't a team that I'm expecting to make it out of the play-in. If they had to face the Magic or the Heat in a game, they're probably going to lose. Even to the 10-seed Atlanta Hawks, I think there's a good chance they find a way to lose that game as well. So they're probably going to lose in the play-in tournament again, and even if they somehow make it out of the play-in tournament and into the playoffs as an 8 seed, they're getting swept in historic fashion by the Boston Celtics. They would get annihilated, or even if they push up the standings a little bit and make it in as a 7 seed, any of those top teams are going to absolutely eviscerate the Chicago Bulls in a first-round playoff series. This isn't a team like the Miami Heat that can make a deep run, shock the world as an 8 seed. They just don't have that talent. They don't have that experience. They're not that type of squad. It's also, at the same time, not a team that's bad enough to get one of the top picks, because they do still have Caruso, DeRozan, LaVine, Coby White. He's breaking out. He's been amazing this season. Like, they've got some talented players. It's enough to go ahead and keep them at least afloat in the play-in range. Not enough to let them be towards the bottom of the standings. Not enough to let them become one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. They're just stuck in the middle with no path to becoming good enough and seemingly an unwillingness from the front office to be bad enough to help this team improve in the long term. At the moment, Chicago seems perfectly fine with just hanging out and doing nothing, just hoping that they can somehow recapture the magic that they had back in the 2021-2022 season, which was a really fun year for Chicago. They were the 1 seed at the All-Star break. Great play from DeRozan, Lonzo, Vucevic, Zach LaVine. It felt like they could maybe make some noise in the playoffs, but injuries ended up striking. They regressed. They were not great against over 500 teams like the top-level squads all throughout that season, and that eventually caught up to them, and they lose to the Milwaukee Bucks in a very quick first-round series in 5 games. It was a fun year, but that was 2 years ago, and at this point, the talent that they have on the roster, while it's the same named guys, they're not the same players that they used to be. DeRozan has regressed. He's no longer this all-NBA second-teamer that he was in that season. Zach LaVine has regressed majorly and is very injury-prone. Plus, it's been very well made known that he doesn't even want to be there. He wants to be traded, wants to go somewhere else. So that's a problem that you have on your table. Lonzo hasn't played since that season. I don't know what he's going to look like when he comes back. Hopefully he's a similar player because he was great for them, but there's no telling. Vucevic is a shell of his former self, nowhere near the all-star that he was at that point. The team is the same in name only, definitely not in the play of the personnel, and it feels like they're just hoping to somehow recapture magic that doesn't exist anymore. And rather than address the mediocrity that this team has been suffering through for the past 2 seasons and some change, they're just chilling, doing nothing. Again, no player trade since 2021. That's absolutely ridiculous. Every team has made some type of deal, even if it's a small one. Just do anything at this point. But instead, they're not. And also in that time frame, they've completely mismanaged the trade value of their top pieces. It's no longer at a point where they could probably get insane returns for a lot of their guys. A lot of these players have completely lost the value that they might have had, like, even at last year's deadline. If they blew it up last year, they could have gotten a great return for a lot of these players and started a really interesting rebuild. Instead, now, guys' value has rapidly declined, and I don't even know what you're going to get on the market for a ton of these players. Like, Zach LaVine is out for the season, and so he was never likely going to be dealt after that injury. But even before that, nobody wanted him because he's been kind of meh this season compared to his usual standards, and you gave him a massive contract rather than moving off of him when you could have. So now he's on an albatross of a contract, isn't that great of a player, is dealing with injuries. You've completely mismanaged his value. Not to mention, again, that he's pretty publicly made it known that he doesn't want to be in Chicago anymore. DeMar DeRozan was an All-NBA guy back in 2022. He was an All-Star last season. He has had some great years for Chicago, some of the better years of his entire career. If you trade him at last year's deadline, you probably could have gotten decent value for an All-Star caliber player that still has a couple years on his contract. However, you don't trade him at last year's deadline. Okay, not great. His value is probably lower now when he's playing worse. He's older. He's on an expiring contract now, but I'm sure there's still somebody who's interested at this year's deadline, and you can go ahead and get some value for DeRozan before he potentially walks for nothing this offseason as an unrestricted free agent. But nope, didn't trade him at this deadline either. They held on to him, and now they're going to go into the offseason where they're going to try and convince a 34-year-old DeMar DeRozan who probably wants to compete for a title that Chicago is the place to do it when they've had no chance of doing it over the past few years. Even the year where they were really good, they probably weren't real contenders. Why would he stay here? Apparently they're far apart on an extension. He probably wants to go get more money. I'm sure another team will offer him some. You probably are going to lose him for nothing. And if you lose DeMar when you probably could have traded him with all-star level value for nothing, that is an absolute failure as a front office. Then you've got Alex Caruso, who right now is at the peak of his trade value. Alex Caruso has probably never been more valuable as an asset than this moment right now. He's one of the league's best guard defenders. A lot of people tell you he's the best overall guard defender in the NBA, probably going to be all defense again. He's in the midst of his best offensive season ever, career high in points and shooting around 40% from deep. He is a perfect piece for a number of contenders. He's also on a really, really cheap contract. You could have gotten immense value for Alex Caruso, most likely. Probably a pick or two. There's a rumor that the Golden State Warriors might have been willing to offer them Moses Moody for him, but no. They don't trade him because from Golden State, who they had conversations with, they asked for Jonathan Kuminga, who's currently putting up 20 points per game consistently over his past 15 contests, and they've said is untouchable. What are you doing? The only guy that has significant value on your roster, you're way over asking for his price, and then they don't end up trading him because no team is going to meet that insane offer when you probably could have already gotten pretty good offers from anywhere else. You can still trade him in the offseason. He's not expiring, but he's going to be expiring going into this upcoming season, so his value is probably lower. There's another year on him. I just don't know what they're doing. They're wasting every opportunity to get good value back for their guys and start this rebuild ASAP because they're not going anywhere. Andre Drummond, his value is never going to be higher for the rest of his career than it is right now. Didn't trade him. Nikola Vucevic was really good the past couple of seasons, and this year is shooting 27.4% from three and is the worst overall true shooting percentage by a center in the entire NBA. So probably nobody wanted him at this year's deadline, so they squandered that opportunity last year. Every single player that has had any type of real trade value, they've held on to, they've done nothing with, and they're probably going to end up losing a lot of these guys for way less than they could have gotten for them previously. So to sum it all up, they've completely tanked everybody's trade value, made no effort to change this team whatsoever, and seem very committed to staying on this absolutely mediocre path that they're on. Their GM, Arturas Karnisovas, even said himself in his post-trade deadline press availability, which was crazy to watch. I'm not even a Bulls fan, and I was mad watching it. There were reporters who were dumbfounded about them doing nothing at this deadline, and they were asking, what's the plan? Why are you going to continue to be mediocre? They used that word specifically and asked, what do you say to upset fans? His response just continuously was, we have a competitive group and we're going to compete for the playoffs. He even said at one point that trades at the deadline typically don't improve teams. What do you think the point of the whole deadline is? And it's not even just the deadline. They've made no trades for 3 years. There's no excuse for this. Like, it's a cool start if you compete for the playoffs, but it's a big step back from where you once were back in 2022. You're not getting back to that point. The rest of the East is rapidly competing while you're getting worse. You're falling behind. If you just go ahead and rebuild now, at the very least, you can restart the process of trying to catch up. It feels like they're just completely afraid of making trades after the Vucevic failure, because while in the moment trading for Vuce was exciting, they ended up giving up probably way more than he was worth. They gave the Magic Wendell Carter Jr., Franz Wagner came out of that deal, Jet Howard. They gave up a lot to bring in Vucevic, who has been good for them at times, but is now playing some of the worst basketball. In fact, it probably is the worst basketball of his entire career. So it just feels like they're afraid. Like, they could have traded everyone, started their rebuild. The rest of the season, they could have let Coby White cook, Patrick Williams if he comes back, and gone into the offseason with one of the top picks in the draft while most other teams in the East are trying to compete. They could have slid down the standings, gotten a good pick, and started this rebuild. You could have had Ayo Dosunmu cooking. Like, let's see what Julian Phillips and Dalen Terry can do, because they've only played limited time as of late. Just do anything other than what you're doing now, which has resulted in nothing. But instead, they've decided to head into the offseason with a lot of uncertainty, a front office that is afraid to make trades, and probably another late lottery pick, while other Eastern Conference teams are picking directions, improving, and doing stuff that the Bulls just are afraid to do at this point. It's frustrating. Again, I'm not even a Bulls fan, and this is really annoying to me. I'm friends with a couple of Bulls fans. Like, I know Kenny made a crazy rant on his channel talking all about Chicago, and I don't blame him. If I was in his spot, I would be making rant videos pretty much every single day. Surprised that he only made one after the way yesterday went. My guy, Jacob Rusty Buckets, put out a tweet saying, like, I don't even know if I want to be a Bulls fan at this point with the way that they're doing things, because it's just upsetting. Bulls fans are upset. They're tired. They're angry. And it makes sense, because the front office is cool with mediocrity. They're cool with doing nothing at all while the rest of the NBA picks a direction. It's disappointing. I was hoping to see them make some type of deal, shake up the deadline, shake up this roster. Nothing at all. So if you're a Bulls fan, let me know how you feel down below in the comments. Even if you're not a Bulls fan, let me know what you think about Chicago. What should they do going forward? What should their moves be in the offseason? What do you think about what they've done so far? Do you think this team could make the playoffs? And even if they do, like, what do you think they can do there? Because I think they get destroyed by whoever they end up facing. I appreciate y'all watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. I'll see you later. Real one, say back.